Japan's dark cells. What happens when you break the law in a country with zero mercy before we begin? If dark truths, real consequences, and stories the system doesn't want you to see keep you awake at night, hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment now because this one only gets darker from here. The chase ended under the cold white lights of a Tokyo expressway at 2:14 a.m. Sirens cut through the rain as the compact sedan spun out, tires screaming against wet asphalt. Traffic cameras caught the moment the driver's door flew open and a man stumbled out, hands shaking, breath ragged, suit jacket torn. He didn't run far. In Japan, running only makes things worse. By sunrise, his name was already stamped into the system. Kenji Sato. Age 32. No violence. No weapons. No blood. Just a financial crime. Data manipulation tied to an overseas account, a scheme that would barely earn a headline in the West. In Japan, it was enough. They didn't read him his future. They didn't need to. From the moment the steel doors closed behind him, time stopped behaving normally. The intake process was silent, mechanical, ritualistic. Shoes removed. Hair measured. Posture corrected by a tap of a baton. Not hard, not cruel, just precise. Every movement had a rule. Every rule had a consequence. Kenji learned the first one fast. Eyes forward, mouth shut, hands flat against the thighs. The holding cells smelled of disinfectant and something older, fear soaked into concrete. There were other men, but they might as well have been shadows. Talking was forbidden. Looking too long was forbidden. Breathing too loudly felt forbidden. Guards didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply watched, clipboards in hand, pens ready. Kenji thought of the chase, the rain, the mistake. He thought of how small the crime had seemed when it began. He didn't think about prison. In Japan, prison is never loud in the imagination. It's quiet. And that's the problem. The investigation moved quickly. It always does. Confession rates are high for a reason. Interrogations stretched for hours, then days, conducted with calm voices and relentless repetition. The same questions, the same pauses, the same expectation of agreement. Sleep deprivation, without calling it that. Pressure, without fingerprints. Kenji signed before he fully understood what he was admitting to. The sentence wasn't long. Officially, 3 years. In another country, that would be survivable. In Japan's correctional system, it was an eternity measured in rules. The prison stood outside the city, low and gray, blending into the winter sky. No razor wire theatrics. No chaos. Just order. The kind that presses down on your chest until you forget what disorder ever felt like. Inside, Kenji was issued a uniform, a number, and a manual, pages of regulations he would be tested on without warning. March wrong? Punishment. Speak out of turn? Punishment. Fail to respond loudly and instantly? Punishment. The days followed a script so rigid it felt unreal. Wake-up call. Inspection. Labor. Meals eaten in silence. Time to the second. Conversations reduced to permitted phrases. Emotion erased. Individuality dissolved. The guards didn't need to intimidate the inmates. The system did it for them. Then came the first mistake. It was small. Almost invisible. Kenji turned his head a fraction too early during a corridor transition, reacting to a sound behind him. A guard's pen paused mid-scratch. That was all. By nightfall, Kenji was escorted down a narrower hall, the air colder, the walls closer. Solitary confinement wasn't announced. It was implied. A door opened. A door closed. Light stayed on. Silence deepened. Hours passed. Or days. He couldn't tell. There was no clock. No voice. Just the hum of electricity and his own breathing. Suddenly too loud. Suddenly dangerous. He recited rules in his head to stay calm. Posture. Silence. Obedience. That's when he noticed something carved into the wall, faint but deliberate. A list of names. Dates. And one repeated sentence, etched deeper than the rest, over and over again. I followed every rule. It still wasn't enough. Kenji stepped back, heart pounding, because some of the dates were recent. And that was the moment he realized his sentence hadn't just begun. It had already swallowed others whole. By the time Kenji was released from solitary, something inside him had shifted. He walked differently now, slower, more deliberate, as if the air itself might accuse him of breaking a rule he couldn't see. The guards noticed. They always noticed. But they said nothing. Silence, he was learning, was the sharpest tool in the building. Back in the main block, the prison felt tighter than before. The corridors hadn't shrunk, yet they pressed closer. The routines repeated with merciless precision, but now Kenji understood the hidden layer beneath them. This place wasn't designed to hold bodies. It was designed to train obedience until resistance became unthinkable. He started watching, not openly, never openly, but through reflections in polished floors, through the shadows cast on concrete walls. Inmates disappeared from the lines sometimes. Not often. Just enough to make you doubt your memory. One day a man stood 2 places ahead of Kenji in the workshop. The next day there was a gap where he should have been. No announcement. No explanation. The line simply closed. During labor, Kenji worked beside an older inmate named Masaru, assigned to him by chance or design. It was impossible to tell. Masaru's movements were flawless, robotic. He never hesitated, never blinked at the wrong moment. Once, when a guard passed too close, Kenji's hand twitched. Masaru didn't look at him, but his voice came out barely above a breath. "Don't," he said. That was it. One word. Enough to save Kenji from another mark on his record. Days later, during a rare permitted exchange period, Masaru spoke again. His eyes stayed fixed forward, lips barely moving. "They don't punish to correct," he whispered. "They punish to record." Kenji didn't understand then. He would. The first sign came during inspection. A clipboard. A pause. A guard's pen hovering over Kenji's name longer than necessary. That night, his meal tray arrived missing an item. The next morning, his work assignment changed without notice. Minor things. Harmless on their own. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone was building a file. Kenji remembered the names carved into the solitary wall. He began counting days, tracking faces, memorizing numbers stitched onto uniforms. He noticed that inmates with too many minor infractions were transferred, not released, not isolated, but moved into a separate wing. The Rehabilitation Evaluation Unit, according to official documents. No one ever came back from there the same. Masaru was taken one morning. His movements had been perfect, his record nearly clean. Still, 2 guards appeared behind him, hands resting lightly at their sides. Masaru nodded once, as if he had expected it. As he passed Kenji, their eyes met for half a second. There was no fear in Masaru's expression, only relief. That night, Kenji couldn't sleep. The lights never went off, but now they seemed brighter, harsher. He replayed Masaru's words in his mind. Punish to record, record to decide. Decide what? The answer came sooner than he expected. During a scheduled medical evaluation, Kenji noticed his file lying open on a desk. It wasn't an accident. The nurse stepped away too cleanly, too precisely. Kenji glanced down, heart racing. Pages of notes. Observations. Behavioral assessments. Micro-violations listed with timestamps. Head angle deviation. Response delay, 0.7 seconds. Emotional flatness. Inconsistent. At the back of the file, stamped in red, was a code he recognized from whispered rumors. Reconditioning candidate. The nurse returned before he could read more. The file closed. The moment vanished. But the damage was done. That evening, Kenji was called from his cell after final count. 2 guards waited, faces unreadable. No explanation. No destination announced. As he followed them down a corridor he had never walked before, he noticed the walls change. Thicker. Cleaner. Newer. The air smelled different, sterile, clinical. At the end of the hall stood a door without a number. Just a symbol. And as it opened, Kenji heard something he hadn't heard in months. A human voice screaming. Then the door shut behind him. The room beyond the door was brighter than anything Kenji had seen inside the prison. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. No shadows to hide in. The scream he'd heard cut off abruptly, replaced by a calm voice reciting numbers. A countdown. Measured. Controlled. Kenji stood frozen as two guards guided him forward. Not roughly, not gently, precisely. At the center of the room sat a single chair bolted to the floor. Across from it, behind a pane of reinforced glass, figures observed in silence. Clipboards again. Always the clipboards. This is not punishment, a voice said through a speaker. This is correction. They didn't ask questions. They didn't accuse him of anything new. Instead, they reviewed his life in fragments. Charts. Behavioral graphs. Comparisons between his intake posture and his current one. His reactions to isolation. His response times to commands. Kenji realized then that his crime had stopped mattering the moment he entered the system. What mattered was compliance. The process began without ceremony. Hours blurred together as instructions were given and repeated until the words lost meaning. Sit. Stand. Bow. Respond. Silence. Mistakes were met not with pain, but with reset. Start again. From the beginning. Again. 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 Fatigue crept in like poison, dulling thought, softening resistance. At one point, Kenji laughed. It slipped out unexpectedly, a fractured sound born from exhaustion and disbelief. The room went still. Pens stopped moving. The calm voice paused. That response has been noted, it said. He never laughed again. When he returned to his cell days later, maybe weeks, he was different. He knew that without needing to check a mirror. His movements were flawless now. His posture perfect. His voice sharp and immediate when permitted to speak. The guards nodded when they passed him. Approval, not kindness. But something was missing. Kenji tried to remember Masaru's face and couldn't. Tried to recall the sound of rain on the expressway the night of the chase, and it felt distant, unreal. Memories were still there, but flattened, stripped of weight. The system hadn't erased him. It had optimized him. Months passed. His record improved dramatically. No infractions. No notes. No observations worth flagging. He became invisible in the best possible way. That was when the notice arrived. Early release. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, though his posture remained perfect. Other inmates didn't react. They never did. Celebration was not part of the routine. The gate opened on a gray morning. Outside, the world felt too loud, too chaotic. Cars moved without order. People spoke without permission. Kenji stood still until a guard cleared his throat. "You may go," the guard said. Kenji bowed. Freedom didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure. Life after prison was harder than confinement. Employers saw the record and turned away politely. Friends spoke carefully, then stopped calling. Conversations felt unscripted, dangerous. There were no rules to memorize. No right way to stand. No penalties for hesitation. Only judgment. At night, Kenji sat in his small apartment, lights on, unable to sleep in darkness. Silence made his chest tighten. He caught himself sitting straight-backed on the floor, hands on thighs, eyes forward. Correct posture. Safe posture. One evening, months after his release, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A behavioral evaluation. Updated. Recent. At the bottom, stamped in red, was a familiar code. Post-release compliance. Satisfactory. Kenji looked around his apartment, heart pounding. No cameras. No observers. Just him. Or so he thought. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Then he sat down back straight, waiting for instructions that never came. Because in Japan's dark cells, the sentence doesn't always end at the gate. And if this story unsettled you, if it made you question how thin the line between order and control really is, make sure you subscribe. The next story goes even deeper, and you won't want to face it alone.